Thanks everyone for sticking around with us after that excellent keynote by FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr. Now we'll move on to our first panel of day 2 of the Everything Policy Program, Connecting Communities and Bridging the Digital Divide. Now, CTIA and its members have had a long-standing commitment to bridging the digital divide. Wireless providers have made significant investments to reach all Americans and ensure that low-income families and students have affordable access to service. Of course, the historic funding provided in the Infrastructure Act will help us connect even more communities and consumers. And that's on top of the ongoing universal service programs that have been the foundation for advancing broadband connectivity. Today, I am pleased to be joined by this stellar panel of government and industry experts where we can talk about our collective efforts to implement programs on deployment, affordability, and inclusion, and leveraging wireless investments to help achieve Internet for all. So I'd like to introduce in alphabetical order this amazing group of panelists, and I'm starting here with Will Adams, Vice President, Strategic Policy and Planning at T-Mobile. Next, we have Kevin Gallagher, Senior Advisor to Secretary Gina Raimondo at the Department of Commerce, followed by Anisa Green, Director, Federal Regulatory and Chief of Staff at AT&T. Then we have Trent Harkrader, Chief of the Wireline Competition Bureau at the FCC. Next up, Jeff Marks, Vice President, Government and Policy Advocacy at Ericsson. And rounding us out, welcome David Zylka, Chief Technology Officer at Carolina West Wireless. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks.
Okay, so today I would like to start the conversation with a topic that we've heard about this past couple of days, and that is industry investment. Wireless companies invested $39 billion in 2022 alone, a record, to extend their networks and connect more consumers. We've also heard that 5G fixed wireless access is the fastest growing category of residential and business broadband offerings. I'm going to start with you, David. So Carolina West CEO Slayton Stewart has been vocal, including yesterday during the keynotes, about the benefits of 5G for the digital economy and helping to close the digital divide. Can you speak more about that here?
Absolutely. Slayton and I talk about the world we live in a lot. So we live in an interconnected digital world. And in order to take advantage of that, to unlock the economic, educational, the medical, and social value in that digital world, you need to be able to connect to that world. So what we've been doing over the last few years have been putting in place the building blocks of 5G and trying to bring forth some of the values of enhanced feature sets as well as enhanced coverage that we can derive from 5G. We're out there, as we put in these building blocks, what we're doing is we're bringing in the capability of enhanced speeds, capacity, location technology, connected device density, as well as lower latencies. And what people are doing, there are a lot of companies as well as developers out there who are using these building blocks to develop new services and features to leverage the power and unleash the power of 5G into our communities. With that, though, we deal with 5G. I can sit here and talk about the technology, but more important, what we're trying to do with 5G in our communities. If you listen to Slayton's keynote speech yesterday, we deal with a lot of rural aspects of our country. We're located in the Blue Ridge Mountains along the western edge of North Carolina, some very difficult terrain. But in there, we're dealing with two different digital divides that we're trying to satisfy. The first is based upon geography. We're in a very low population density area with extreme terrain associated with it. And what we're trying to do is chip away at that and bring 5G technology or broadband access to our constituents out there. On top of that, when we look at it, we're not alone. There's other small companies just like Carolina West who are challenged by geography along the Appalachian Mountains, the Blue Ridge Mountains, as well as in the northeast portion of New England and the far west. If you look at the broadband data collection maps, you can see it clearly in there. Our networks are lagging behind our urban and suburban counterparts, and we're trying to close that gap. Second thing we're dealing with, even in places where we have superior networks or great networks, great connectivity, there's still an affordability issue that we're struggling with. How, we bring these networks to our citizens, and we're trying to figure out how we can charge them something so we can pay for this expansion and enhancement of our networks and bring them connectivity. So we're dealing with those two things. Some of the benefits we've had with 5G, though, Amy touched on it with 5G and fixed wireless access. It's been a very impressive product. We've been able to push broadband access out to many unserved communities and citizens out in our footprint. So that's been a success story. But then as we look out, we want to do more of that, push it further. But we see 5G in our footprint or our networks as a tool, a significant tool to push our coverage further, as well as bring affordability to our customer base.
Thanks so much, David. I'd like to pick up on that comment on fixed wireless. So Will, in your view, how is 5G fixed wireless access helping to connect these types of rural communities, as well as provide additional competition and consumer choice?
Well, first, Amy, thanks for having me and having all of us up here. It's always good to have a sitting FCC commissioner as your warm-up act. So thank you, Commissioner Carr, appreciate that. Just to back up your statistic, T-Mobile last year invested $14 billion in capital expenditures. That's by far our largest CapEx year in our history. And what did all that money go to? Largely building out 5G in rural America, and a big part of that story is fixed wireless. So I'll do a little bit of bragging for our company, but I'll include some others as well. We went from about 0 customers to 3 million fixed wireless customers in a matter of 2 years. And if you add Verizon to that, I think I see some Verizon folks out there. Okay, free plug Verizon. You don't get many of these, okay? So if you add Verizon, who came in a little bit later with their product that's pretty similar, we have about 6 million customers between us in a very short amount of time. Another way of looking at it is the total number of net adds in-home broadband. So again, competing against fiber or cable, any technology, almost all of the net adds in the last year and a half have been fixed wireless. We are the most interesting thing in-home broadband today. I'll go back to a T-Mobile plug. The #1 growing in-home broadband provider in this country is not Comcast, it's not Charter, it is T-Mobile, a mobile company. And I say that because we're at a wireless conference, obviously, but also because it just shows how much the industry has changed, and I think how much choice consumers now have.
Well, thank you for that. And as we are making this tremendous progress in building out, I'm going to take us back to a topic that we started to discuss at last year's panel, and that's broadband data. So it's helpful to visualize the progress that we're making on deployment to better understand the scope of the digital divide and to ensure that we're targeting this valuable funding effectively. Now, at last year's panel, we are on the cusp of an important breakthrough, the release of more detailed and accurate broadband maps. Trent, I'm coming your way. Congratulations. So updating the broadband maps was an enormous undertaking in a short amount of time. The latest version of the maps was released at the end of May, and the feedback's been positive. So can you talk more about this milestone and the importance of accurate, centralized broadband data for policymaking?
Yeah, thank you, Amy, and thanks for the invite. Some people may be wondering why the Wireline Bureau Chief is here, but I have a little something to contribute, so don't worry. The reason why the map in May was so momentous is because it made Kevin Gallagher happy. And I can expound on that if you want me
Please.
to. So taking a step back, the broadband data collection and the maps that resulted came to us in 2020 through the Broadband Data Act. So before the broadband equity and affordability and deployment program was even a gleam in anybody's eye. What Congress did in the Infrastructure Act, though, was to say, before Kevin can spend any of his $42 billion, the FCC has to publish the maps. So that was a fun surprise, and we wanted to make sure that we had a map that was worthy of the incredible broadband investment. So the important thing about this collection, and what made it so different from what the FCC had done in the past, is we were far more granular this time around. So it was location-based instead of broader geographical areas. And there was also this congressional mandate that we host a challenge process where companies, states, localities, even individual consumers could look at our map and challenge what they saw on there. Now, these are maps that, like many of the data collections that we've done before, were based primarily on provider input, on provider data. But the challenge process, which was required by Congress, was something that we wanted to use to try to pressure test. And I think that was a really important part in lending credibility to the collection and also to the ultimate maps. And so when you look at the maps in May, those are the second version. Normally you don't celebrate the second version as much as we did, but it was because that was the first time we had gone through and had a full challenge cycle. Now I know that challenge cycle was tough for everybody. It was tough for us. First time, anytime you do anything at the government, or probably anywhere, but especially at the government, there are wrinkles. For the providers that had to respond to the challenges, for the challengers, it was all new. And we spent a lot of time doing outreach. We spent a lot of time doing education. And I think, and I will let Kevin weigh in on this, but I think this is one of the areas where my agency and his organization worked really well together. Talking to people in all 50 states, leveraging the BEAD staff that he has to go out and say, here's how you file a challenge, here's how you respond to a challenge. I found, like somewhat to my surprise, that the outreach that we did and the education that we did in that first cycle was as meaningful as anything else that we did. And I think that's why we got to where we were at the end of May.
Absolutely, and it continues to this day. I really appreciate the outreach and education you mentioned. Staff at the FCC has been incredibly responsive when we've had questions about this, and also highlighting, right, that interagency coordination, making sure that we're literally all on the same page, in this case a map, when we're making these important decisions. Now, Kevin, I see you smiling, so that's good, because as Trent was saying, these updated maps, they serve as the baseline for those allocations that NTIA made for that $42.5 billion in BEAD funding. So let's talk about next steps. So how are states leveraging this better data? And then also, how will those deployments feed back into the FCC's maps?
So Trent's right. The maps made me very happy. And I think we very intentionally made the decision to wait for version 2 to allow the challenge process to play out. And I think any objective observer would say that that was the right call. I will acknowledge that the maps aren't perfect, and no one ever promised that they would be, but they are the most accurate, most granular maps that we've ever had. And we felt really good about version 2 and its ability to signal where we needed to make BEAD investments. It is a living map. There is no static map. That map has already been updated multiple times. The FCC staff is updating it consistently. The secretary actually has a little sign outside her office that has the number of unserved locations in the country, and we change it every time Trent's team updates the map. But that's an important milestone for us to have what we think is the most accurate picture and accurate number of where we still need to build out broadband infrastructure. And that's what the BEAD program is all about. I will say that there are two maps that I think the FCC controls that are important for folks. The first is obviously the availability map. The second is where all the federal funding is going. And that's an equally important map because the private sector has made a significant amount of investment. The federal government has as well. Through the RDOF program, through the Treasury Capital Funds program, through Reconnect, through other NTIA grant programs. And so the federal funding map that the FCC has created is equally important for states because it tells them where they don't need to go, where someone has already said there is a federal commitment to reach those homes. So we're excited about both maps. We think that the maps will continue to evolve over time. States will use both of those maps as they figure out where exactly they want to deploy their BEAD funding. And we anticipate that, as Trent mentioned, the partnership between NTIA and FCC will continue as we work to get that number from 8.5 million to 0.
That's fantastic news. We look forward to continuing to work with you on that and on the BEAD program. And on that front, when it comes to the BEAD program, we've worked as an industry to advocate policies that would enable fixed wireless to be a meaningful part of the solution to connect all Americans. So Will, can you explain why leveraging a mix of technologies, including fixed wireless, is important to meeting the goals of the Infrastructure Act?
Because $42 billion ain't what it used to be. Well, but think about it, right? So the president signed IJA into law in November of 21. Since then, the economy-wide, we've had 10% inflation, give or take. We've had sector-specific inflation of about 15%. Equipment, labor, that sort of thing. And so 42 starts to feel more like 35 or 36 billion. And that's not enough money to fiber every rural household in this country, even if that were your preference. Speaking of preference, at the risk of ticking off Kevin, you've been smiling too much. Let's talk about that preference. So I'll share our experience at T-Mobile. We talked about our fixed wireless service. Majority of our customers come from cable. They had cable before. They didn't like it for whatever reason. They signed up with us. A good proportion of our new customers are from fiber. We've not publicly disclosed that yet, so I'm not going to do that here. But a good portion of them used to have fiber for whatever reason, didn't work for them, they came over. Our NPS scores, Net Promoter Scores, it's a marketing term for customer satisfaction basically, are higher than fiber providers. And so what I take from that on the policy side of the house, getting away from advertising for T-Mobile and fixed wireless, but what I take from that from the policy side is, if we're going to spend $42 billion or more with all the other pots of funding that exist, we should listen to what consumers are choosing. And instead of telling them that everybody needs fiber, we should be open to a variety of tools. And increasingly, what they're saying to my company and to a lot of others in this industry is we want 5G at home and we want 5G on the go.
So we should be listening to consumers, and we should also be looking at the data. And Jeff, I know Ericsson has run the numbers on these BEAD allocations. Now, understanding that each state is going to be different when it comes to their allocations, how far do you think this funding is going to go in terms of fiber deployments, and how much are states going to be relying on fixed wireless access to meet that commitment of connecting all unserved and unserved Americans?
Well, yeah, thank you for having me on the panel. Excellent question, and it's one that is a bit of a moving target. Every state's a little bit different. And back to the maps, they are a breathing, living document. ACAM just got allocated quite a bit more funding. That will change who is served and who is unserved a bit. There's been returned RDOF funds. That will change things too. But looking at the numbers, what we've seen is approximately that the BEAD money can go its furthest if we look at about 25% of BEAD funding going to fixed wireless access. The majority of BEAD should go to fiber. Right? It is a proven technology. There are places where it works. But if you want to actually close the digital divide, if you want to reach the most customers with quality broadband and affordable price, fixed wireless has to be part of the solution. Now, what you get with fixed wireless is you put up a tower. A tower costs approximately the same thing as about 5 miles of fiber. That tower can serve multiple homes. But the key is when you're talking about the areas that are hard to serve, that not only are you serving multiple households with quality broadband, not only are you serving the farmhouse, you're also serving the farmland. You get a mobile service along with the fixed wireless service. So to look at that, there's benefits beyond home broadband when you deploy fixed wireless access. So what I would kind of caution is the way we spend the first 30 some odd billion in BEAD is not how we're going to be judged on closing the digital divide. It's that last 10 billion. What are we going to do with it? How are we going to reach the most people with quality broadband?
Excellent points, and love to hear about the multiplier effect, right, of when you provide fixed wireless, you get the added benefits of mobility as well. So thank you for flagging that. So Kevin, I'll come back to you with a couple of questions. So following up on this thread of fixed wireless, I know that the teams are working throughout the country, talking to the states about their proposals. Do you expect that states will take a technology-inclusive approach?
I do. I think I agree 100%. I think the majority of the projects that are funded by BEAD are going to be fiber projects, but there's going to be a mix of technologies. It's going to depend a lot on how much that state received in BEAD funding. It's going to depend on what other funding that state has or hasn't leveraged to build out networks. And so we do anticipate a range. And I also agree that the last 10% will be the most difficult. And so, you know, as we're working with states, the thing that I would want to emphasize the most is whatever technology they decide to go with, it's going to be extremely important that that technology can serve every single location in a project area simultaneously at broadband speeds. And if it can do that, it's eligible for BEAD funding. I think we've already seen a handful of states put out their initial proposals for public comment, and we're seeing some similarities across those approaches and some differences. And I think that's what we can expect across all 56 states and territories. We're going to see folks who have really worked hard to think about what is the right solution for our state, how much money are we willing to spend per household, and how do we make sure that at the end of the day we have 100% coverage. So I expect fixed wireless will be a big part of making sure we get to 100%.
Great, thank you. And picking up on your comment about states having already started with their initial proposals, for those who aren't following the process as closely, can you talk more about the next milestones we should be expecting on the program and funding?
Absolutely. It was really an incredible day at the White House when the president made the BEAD allocations. And I'm not quite sure what folks expected, but to see 19 states get more than $1 billion was something that I honestly wasn't predicting until we saw the May version of the maps. It was really an important milestone, but it was the starting gun. It wasn't the end. And states are working hard to put together their initial proposals. Every state's initial proposal is due by December 27th. That's 180 days after they were notified of their allocation, which is required by the program. I will say that it sounds cruel to say 2 days after Christmas is when your initial proposal is due. I will acknowledge that. However, I will also say that each state has to put their initial proposal out for public comment for a 30-day period. So in truth, all the work that the state has to do is going to be done by mid-November to meet that deadline. So everybody's going to have the vast majority of their work done before Thanksgiving. And then what we'll see between mid-November and the end of December is the public comment process playing out. It's, I think, really, really important, and I can't stress this enough, please engage in that public comment process. We did that for a reason. We didn't want states, and frankly, we didn't want NTIA to have the only say in the approach. And we thought that crowdsourcing the approaches was the right result, or the right effort to get the best result. So there are, I think, 4 or 5 states right now whose public comment periods are open. We're going to see a lot more over the next several weeks. Please engage in that process. We did that for a reason. We wanted people to look and really pay very close attention to each state's plan on how they're going to invest that funding, and to get feedback and to ask questions and to pressure test that approach before they spend, you know, in many cases, more than $1 billion.
It's an exciting time with the BEAD program, and appreciate the opportunity to engage with you all and with the states to help make the program a success. But it's also exciting times at the FCC as well, yeah? Well, and I don't mean that one. While the BEAD program is focused on fixed broadband, the FCC has not forgotten about the importance of ensuring that consumers have access to mobile broadband as well. Now Trent, the FCC just recently adopted a further notice that continues the implementation of the 5G fund now that we have the benefit of the better mobile coverage data. So can you talk more about the Commission's latest thinking and goals for the 5G fund?
Yeah, for sure. So last week, I think we adopted, sorry, the FCC, I don't want to take Brendan's job. The FCC adopted a further notice of proposed rulemaking. Now, you all look like a sophisticated bunch, but for those of you that don't understand like how we do things, and I don't, honestly, that means we jump-started a rulemaking from a couple of years ago. And the reason that we revisited that rulemaking, which was from about, actually 3 years ago, 2020, is because we now have these maps. And you know, I realize we are talking a lot about maps, or at least I'm talking a lot about the maps. And this gets to kind of the unanswered question that you posed to me earlier, is like, why is it important to have accurate maps? And it's important to have accurate maps so we can devote, you know, our resources and send our funding to the right areas. And so that's why the time is now to re-jumpstart this 5G fund. And so what we're going to be looking at a very high level, and again, you all should please participate in that rulemaking. I think it's going to be very, very important. I've heard today that I know the comment period's a little short. For that, I apologize. But I think it speaks to the importance of this rulemaking. But what we want to look at is, you know, do we have the right areas where the money is going to be going? In 2020, there was going to be a reverse auction. You know, we want to look at to make sure that like the eligible areas are still the right areas. The other thing that we want input on is how much is it going to cost? Like Will talked about how the cost of technology has increased. Certainly in the last 3 years it has. And so we want to be able to account for that when we set the budget for whatever the 5G fund is going to look like. And the third is like literally how are we going to use these maps? Are there different ways that we can think about what's in the maps, what's not in the maps? And so we're very excited about this rulemaking. I think it could do some really good things. We've been doing a lot on the fixed side, and I think it's really great that the agency has pivoted a little bit and is starting to look at the wireless side as well.
Well, David, I know you're one of the folks that's excited about this development because Carolina West has been at the forefront of providing service in rural America and advocating for the 5G fund. So what role do you see this fund as playing?
Now, it's critical to our future with 5G and smaller carriers. When you look out there, you know, everybody in this room probably has heard a million times how difficult and how expensive it is to build out in rural areas, you know, terrain challenges and so forth. To me, it's simple math. You take a few people, you spread them out over a large area, and you throw obstacles in their way, mountains and trees, and it becomes exponentially more expensive to build out networks in rural America than it is in urban and suburban areas around the country. And when you look at the policies over the last numerous years for Congress and the FCC, they've made it a point that people in rural America deserve equivalent broadband service or access to broadband service, as well as being at an affordable and competitive price. So, you know, when we're out there building our networks, we have this disparity between we can build a network, but they're expensive. And then if we want to be at a comparable price, we aren't going to be able to fund the building of those networks. And we need help from the government to help fill that gap between the two. So when we're out there, you know, pushing our networks, we're trying to upgrade our networks in the small space. We're challenged though, because if you look at the penetration rate of mobile devices in the United States, we're greater than 100%. We have people, we have customers in our territories that have mobile phones but don't have coverage at their houses or places where they work. They take their phones and go other places. But what it does is it challenges our ability to generate new revenue from traditional service, traditional connectivity. And what we need to do is be able to deploy 5G, and if 5G lives up to its hype about creating new economic value from services and features, we can use that to offset some of our costs of building and maintaining these networks in rural areas. So it's important to have a mechanism out there that we can tap into, and the time to start tapping into that is sooner, not later. We want to push 5G services out there so we're compatible, we're competitive, we have the same access as we do in urban and suburban areas. We can't underline that fact. It's important to our future. We're watching the government put billions of dollars towards fixed broadband service, and we need something similar, something big and bold for the wireless space.
Thanks, David. At this point, I'd like to shift from deployment to affordability. And I'm talking about the Affordable Connectivity Program, or ACP. Now, we know that broadband policies can impact millions of Americans. In this case, with ACP, we know it's 21 million and growing. But the one-time appropriation of $14.2 billion is expected to exhaust early next year. Anisa, I'd like to turn to you. In just 18 months, ACP has become integral to addressing the universal service goal of affordability. What's made it so successful, and what needs to happen to sustain it?
Well, thank you for having me. So success is relative, right? And I think we can all agree, though, that this program has been successful, regardless of how you define it. And I think that in my regulatory, Anisa, AT&T, old folk brain, there were three main components that made this program attractive. One, the voluntary nature of it. Yes, thank you. And I think it attracted more providers than probably originally anticipated, and you had less regulatory restrictions in order to participate, right? You had to get approval from somebody on Trent's team, and then you were able to demonstrate that you are, in fact, providing broadband service where you want to support consumers and then start your work. I think the other part that was actually very attractive was the collaborative outreach thing that ended up working really, really well. You had folks from as high up as the White House and, of course, with different agencies, buzzword ACP. And then you had the providers. Of course, we were obligated to do some of this, but we even went above and beyond our obligations to bring awareness to this program. And then you had those folks on the streets galvanizing more and more awareness for this program, local agencies, local community organizations. It was like everybody was in on the game of making this program successful, right, which I think was a really nice secret sauce to the program. And the third thing, while there's still some space for improvement, I think that the administrator for the program heard some of the cries from consumers that the application process is a little onerous. I'm sugarcoating a little, you've heard from the communities. And they heard that and tried to improve the experience. And yes, better late than never. There has been some improvements in that experience, and I think there's more opportunity to improve that experience for consumers and still guard the program from waste, fraud, and abuse.
Well, it's great to hear what that secret sauce has been, and hopefully we can carry it forward. So Will, we know that more than half of ACP beneficiaries have chosen to apply their benefit to mobile broadband service. Can you talk more about the value of ACP and mobile broadband to consumers?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I think about ACP, I first start first principles, what are we trying to solve? And what I think about is helping the most disadvantaged families get connected to provide service that they couldn't otherwise afford. And so when my team looks at data to try to understand who's participating in the program and why they are, we often turn to pre-existing data that we have in Lifeline. We were one of the biggest Lifeline providers. And Lifeline was a great program, and it allowed us to provide a lot of service to a lot of disadvantaged households. And one of the things that was very interesting about Lifeline, a little bit different than ACP, is that it wasn't 50, it was 95% of households in Lifeline chose mobile. And I think that reflects the truth that if you look at the most disadvantaged families who can only afford, with government assistance, one connection, and they can pick fixed or mobile, they're going to pick mobile. And And so what did ACP do there to help lift up Lifeline and fix problems that were in Lifeline? Well, an obvious one is that no commercial provider can provide first-class, robust market service for $9.25 a month. It's just simply not enough funding. And so with ACP, what we've seen, we offer, by the way, again, not a T-Mobile commercial, but we offer unlimited data, talk, and text, which is much different than our Lifeline offering. And we track the cohort of families who were on Lifeline and now are on ACP with this new service. And we discovered something very interesting. Guess what? You give them a full, robust service, and they start to use that service like everybody else. Data's up, texting's up, talk is up. And so we think first of all, that's a great accomplishment for the program. And we're really excited about seeing that continue as more and more folks choose mobile.
Well, speaking of continuation, Trent, I'll turn back to you. What advice do you have for providers and other stakeholders as we think about that future of ACP?
Okay, Amy, I'm gonna eventually answer your question, but
Okay.
I do want to talk about. It really does seem like not that long ago that Anisa and I were on the phone talking about like how are we going to transition from EBB, an emergency program, to the Affordable Connectivity Program in a matter of a couple of months. And like, how are we going to make that work so that we don't lose a lot of people? And now here we are 21 months later from the start.
About, yeah.
And we are at 21 million households. I think that is a tremendous testament to the providers out there. There are 1,700 to 1,800 providers that are actively in it. Everyone up here has ACP households on their rolls. Including you, by the way. It is a hugely important program, and it makes a real impact. We sent a team to Hawaii last week. There was providers there. I even got some of my programmatic people, who are a lot like me but smarter, and sent them out there. And I was like, let's see how this goes. Let's see what it looks like on the ground instead of us sitting back at the FCC. And they worked 12 to 14-hour days. They ate peanut butter and jelly, but they came back and they were like, that was eye-opening to see how the enrollment process works firsthand. And it took wildfires to get us there, but it showed us how important this program can be, even in the worst of circumstances like that. There was a story a couple of weeks ago now about a young woman in Texas who subscribed to an ACP service. She's a paraplegic in a wheelchair, and her wheelchair was starting to malfunction. And instead of having to go to a service provider to fix what was wrong, they were able to remotely, because of her ACP service, diagnose what was wrong with the wheelchair. That's a very specific use case, but that's the world that we are all going into thanks to the technologies that you all throw out there. So and you multiply that by 21 million households, and you see the scope of the importance of this program. Now, as Amy may have mentioned, we are not unlimited in our funding. Our projections show us running out of money in April. Those are projections. We are keeping an eagle eye on that because we know that is not that far away, particularly when it comes to a program of this size. So we are going to be laser focused on that. This is a compact also between the FCC and the providers out there. I absorb that. I see that every day. It is voluntary, but a lot of you have come through and volunteered and made this program the success that it is. So because of that compact, because we have that agreement, we are thinking through very actively what this looks like if this program does go away. We have to be good stewards of the program. We have to be good stewards of the money. And so me and my team have to be ready for that, what that looks like. So the way that we're thinking about it is there's probably 3 big areas where we think we can help in the near future if it goes that way, right? And I'm not saying that it will, but we have to be prepared. So first of all, we have to talk to the providers about how do you notify the customers about the impending exhaustion of the funds and the drying up of the benefit? How often do you talk? What do you talk? What sort of options do you give them? You all are very good about retention, and I don't want to rely on that too much, but we need to be there in a place where we are giving solid guidance to the households so that they're not confused. Second is we're looking at programmatic changes. Chief among them, do we stop enrollments? Stopping enrollments allows us to spend or to stretch the funding out a little bit further. It reduces some of the volatility in the program a little bit. So that is something that is on the table that we are thinking very seriously about. And really the third thing is more transparent than we have been, and we've been pretty transparent about data, but more transparent about the data and what the projection looks like. That's going to be absolutely crucial, especially as we get into the colder months. So I don't want to end on that. I want to be a little more optimistic. There are a lot of people who support this program. There is across the ecosystem, people really want replenishment, and there is a way to do that. We've had incredible support from Kevin and his very dear friends over at the Department of Commerce. Joey Winder at Treasury, head of the capital projects, gave a wonderful speech when we were in Houston a couple of months ago about the importance of ACP and how it filters into, among other things, the BEAD program. There is an interconnectedness between all of these programs, and ACP is so crucial to that. So I'm committed to making it happen. I'm committed to holding up my end for the households that are subscribed to this, but also the providers that have done so much to make it a success.
Thank you for sharing that, for your commitment, and for the partnership that we've seen in evidence with all the other stakeholders to try to keep this valuable program in place to unleash that connectivity for consumers in untold ways that we're only starting to learn about. So I don't want to close the conversation without coming to another important topic. We've been talking in threes. We've covered deployment. We've covered affordability. We need to talk about digital equity and inclusion. And we have a good story here. The companies have had a longstanding commitment to fostering equity and inclusion. There's funding in the Infrastructure Act for new digital inclusion programs, and there's an FCC proceeding to promote equal access. I'll start with you, Kevin. As NTIA and the states are working to implement the Digital Equity Act, what are some of the goals and pathways for success here?
I would say that building out the infrastructure is necessary but not sufficient to closing the digital divide. And we're really excited about the fact that even in cases where a state needs its full BEAD allocation for the infrastructure, there's dedicated funding through the Digital Equity program to make sure that we're making the right investments to help promote adoption, digital literacy. It's an incredible investment in making sure that folks are able to meaningfully use the infrastructure that we're building out. Folks who have heard me speak in the past will be unsurprised to hear me say that it's not just the digital equity funding that will go towards digital inclusion activities. The E in BEAD does stand for equity, and we think a lot of states, when they're done building out infrastructure, are going to be able to use very sizable amounts of their BEAD allocation to invest in digital inclusion activities. So that's part of why we think that the program is going to be so successful. It is about building infrastructure, but it will be more than that.
It's great to hear that intentionality when it comes to ensuring equitable access. And Anisa, I'd like to draw on your experience here too. You served on the FCC's Communications Equity and Diversity Council. What are some of your takeaways, both at AT&T and through that work? What can you share about?
Ooh, I love this question because some of it is like we were a sorority and fraternity together, so I can't share a lot of the information. But I think that when I was added to the last charter, we had a huge task to take on because the digital discrimination NPRM had just had its moment. And one of our first tasks was to create recommendations for states and localities on how to prevent digital discrimination. Yay. So that was my first thing. So I had a very quick, speedy education on where do we want to be, how do we want to be, what's going on, because I was lucky enough to be able to just shadow my colleague who was actually working on the digital discrimination proceeding. And then I got knee, waist, and neck deep into all that work. And then, as much fun as it is to experience a working group of a lot of different thought leaders and personalities, it was quite an experience. 2 years went by, it almost felt like every day I was talking about the CEDC. And I'm crazy enough to have applied to participate again, and my team is supporting that, and so we're just waiting for the next charter to be announced. So it was a great experience. Thank you, everyone who made that choice to appoint me, and thank you to the chairwoman for having us on that council.
Well, thank you for your participation. It's invaluable. Now, Jeff, we're running close to the end, but I didn't want to leave without noting that your company is also involved in digital inclusion. How are you helping connect those who are not fully connected yet? And do you have anything else to add on opportunities to close the digital divide?
Well, yes, short on time, so I'll be quick. Ericsson does a number of things to connect the unconnected, starting with our technology and building networks that are faster, better, and more affordable to deploy. But then there's other things. I guess I'll stick with just one strain, which is our educational strain, where we work with the ITU's GIGA initiative, investing millions of dollars as well as time and effort on our part. We find that money goes better when there's expertise alongside it to connect over 5,700 schools and 2 million youth just in the last couple of years. Also, I think it's worth noting briefly, and I'll be fast, but financial inclusion. Once you're connected, there are more people who are connected with mobile phones around the world than there are who have access to a bank. And so we've got about a quarter of the adult population who are unbanked. Through our financial inclusion initiatives, we have the Ericsson wallet, which allows people around the world to have access to financial institutions, to be part of the financial system in a way that they wouldn't be, and it's because they have a mobile phone.
Well, thank you for that. And before we wrap up, I was very pleased to hear yesterday during the legal advisors panel for the wireless advisor to the chairwoman to mention an effort that's been a priority for Congress, for the commission, and for providers, and that is the Safe Connections Act. Anisa, could you briefly talk about that initiative and the partnership with the National Domestic Violence Hotline?
Yeah, I mean, CTIA has the partnership with the hotline. We just were fortunate enough to be able to participate in the work that CTIA set up with the National Domestic Violence Hotline. I'm happy to say that I think the significance of the act and the topic definitely resonated with ISPs and specifically wireless providers. And I think everyone finds that it is important to help survivors. And so whatever part and role we need to play, we should play. And I think that's what your members have agreed to do. And we understand that the chairwoman finds this to be very important as well. So we are, I think, in phase 2 of the partnership. The first phase was to figure out ways to immediately help survivors who want to separate their lines from their alleged abusers. And I think most providers have been able to enact that additional step and making sure that they have resources available to them. And then now the next phase is aligned with whatever Trent ends up issuing when it comes to these rules, that we would be taking I think a more holistic approach to being a little more empathetic and sensitive to some of the experiences that survivors are having when they have to make the crucial decision to separate their lines and find another path to safety.
Well, I could listen to all of you for another several hours, but I do know that we have important panels coming up as well on international spectrum and on cybersecurity. So why don't we just pause the conversation there? It'll be ongoing back in DC, and I appreciate that. But why don't we pause here for now and thank the panelists for joining us today for this excellent discussion. Thank you.